Folks, thanks for turning in to the weekend edition where we like to take not just the headlines, a lot of different headlines as we do Monday to Friday, but we like to take a few of them we looked at last week and do a little more behind the scenes. So we do a quick review. The ones last week, the headlines, what's it mean for the week ahead? This will maybe equip you or give you some points of interest to talk about with others that they might not have thought about. Let's look at some of the items and where it's going to take us into the week ahead. As you note, those of you who are regular followers and listeners, we're usually pretty accurate in saying what to watch for. So you can engage with conversation and give people a heads up from your point of view if you agree with what we're saying here. One of the big stories in Canadian politics, of course, last week was the crossing of the floor, the notorious crossing of the floor by a Conservative member of Parliament joining the Liberal minority government. And the reason I think we are going to see more of this, one or two, possibly more, I'm not going to put a number on it, is because now that joining from the Conservative member of Parliament gives the Liberals within one seat of having a coveted majority government. I think the thought of those, if there are those in the Conservative caucus or maybe NDP, the socialists who are thinking of making a move, now would sure be the time, because you would be the man or the woman that would be given the credit for giving the Liberals the majority. And I guarantee there are always goodies made available to people who cross the floor. It's not done immediately because nobody wants to look like you were induced to cross the floor. That's actually a crime. To pay somebody or bribe them to do that, but watch for it. It's just too big a prize for people to resist. Watch for another one or more floor crossings next week. Not sure, but watch for it. The ruling again that we talked about, the Cowichan ruling, it doesn't go away, and neither should it, because it's going to implicate property values and contract law possibly for decades to come if it doesn't get resolved. Of course, this is the case in British Columbia, the city of Richmond, where a First Nations group, the Cowichan tribe, got the Supreme Court Justice Barbara Young to agree with them that somehow they have rights to the land where they used to camp in the summer times and do some fishing way back 150, 200 years ago. And now, of course, it's a city. There's a very good column you might want to read if you have the time. If you don't read the Free Press, a great item to be reading. Barry Weiss, of course, leads that up, and she's recently back in mainstream media, turning around the TV network there. But she references a column by Rupa Subramanya, and Rupa is a Canadian writer commenting on things on the Canadian scene. She's got a very good column there, and in this particular column, she's pointing out, she takes a little different approach, interviews a person who is now older, like me, but talks about the fact that when he was 8 years old and his family came to Canada from India, his dad worked very hard at being a paramedic and also managed to carve out some money to buy a little acreage or two plot in the area that's presently threatened by this court ruling that says all of the lands, these Cowichan related lands in Richmond, are now going to have joint ownership with First Nations. And just talks about the plight of this family. They came here, there was some land for sale. Anybody could have purchased that land. First Nations could have purchased it. They purchased it, worked very hard after regular hours, carved out a little farm plot there. And now the gentleman who was 8 at the time in 1974 is now looking at his life savings possibly gone forever. I'm saying that you're going to see ongoing repercussions, and what you've seen recently, the Premier of British Columbia, the Socialist NDP Premier, is saying, well, you know, what they can do to resolve the problem is give everybody loan guarantees. So all of those people now who, quite rightly, their land is at serious risk, the properties are just not selling like they used to, banks aren't dealing with them because ownership is dubious, and so the government, a typical socialist style, rather than solving the problem or looking and working with the federal government to get this thing resolved at court, they're saying, look, I tell you what, we'll just give you a big old loan guarantee and that will solve your problem. Well, it won't really solve the problem because the land is still in question, and two things need to happen and need to happen quickly. First of all, this case needs to be accelerated. The judge, Barbara Young, said you've got 18 months to try and figure out how you're going to define the ownership, which is kind of ridiculous because this case is going to have ramifications for years. This needs to be moved to the top of the list, to the Supreme Court of Canada. And the Supreme Court of Canada, even before it starts, there's this trend that's been happening, and it's just been happening in Alberta, for instance, where judges on emerging social issues, they have to take special courses. For instance, in Alberta, the Law Society there has required all judges to take special courses in understanding the implications of First Nations and oral tradition, how that should be just as valuable as written or archaeological or evidence-based tradition. They have to take courses on that to become more attuned to that philosophy. I would really like to see Supreme Court justices take courses either for the first time or maybe just to refresh their memories in things like contract law and property law, which are the foundations, the absolute foundations of any successful society. And that would be before they make this ruling, because it's going to go one of two ways, folks. The Supreme Court is either going to come down leaning on the side of the BC Supreme Court Justice Barbara Young and say, yes, First Nations do have a right to that land. That will be a tidal wave effect across the country, because already First Nations groups are filing. For instance, there's filings been made about the city of Kamloops and other areas. So what has already been set in motion is it's going to be like a tsunami, and this has to be settled one way or another. I'm not even going to take, it's a great debate, we'll have a show on that. I'm not going to take a side in the debate right now. Obviously, you know where I'm leaning, but just the fact that there's the uncertainty. Certainty is owed to the First Nations group. They need to know if this is going to have an effect. Certainty is owed to everybody else in Canada in terms of their properties, and are they going to lose value? The other thing to keep in mind, this is really, people are saying, well, why isn't the socialist government in BC reacting more against this? Why isn't the media saying anything negative against this possible trend that First Nations groups can actually have ownership or title or even joint title on land that has been owned by others for 150 years or more? One of the reasons is, for the culturally Marxist media and the culturally Marxist politicians, for sure the NDP party, and to a degree some of pretty strong feeling in the Liberal Party, this is the culturally Marxist dream come true. If what has happened in Richmond is supported by the Supreme Court and that decision stands, private property as we know it will cease to be. It will evaporate, certainly in Richmond, probably around BC, and begin to come into question as across the land First Nations groups, who will be overjoyed at this particular ruling, will challenge the notion that people who've bought land can actually say it's theirs. So because Karl Marx, of course, instituted in some ways, along with other thinkers of the day, this notion that private property is terrible, private property has to go, you cannot have private property, it just leads to all kinds of power structures, it leads to supporting a view of family and definition of family that is just a construct for power purposes. This ruling is the socialist dream. Private property as we know it will end in Canada, depending how this gets resolved. That's why you don't see media going so berserk on it. They're culturally Marxist in their thinking. They kind of think this isn't really that bad an idea. So let's keep an eye this week on what's going to be happening relative to this particular claim, but get it to the Supreme Court. The other thing you could do, government in BC, along with help from the federal government, could consider this. Pick a period of time, let's say 1 year, and say to any First Nations person, if you want to buy any property that's listed in Richmond at fair market value, we'll actually give you the money to buy it. You can own that. It won't cost you anything. We'll give you money from the taxpayers. We're doing that anyway. So let First Nations have first dibs, but it has to be a house or a property that's up for sale, has to be deemed fair market value, and let the First Nation person be given the money by the government to buy that property. Everybody would wind up happy or happier than they are right now might be a partial solution, as well as getting this thing settled one way or another in the Supreme Court. Well, you saw in the U.S. or south of the U.S. the seizing of a Venezuelan oil tanker by the Donald Trump administration, and people are having mixed feelings on this. Watch for the Venezuelan situation to continue to get, I think, even more aggressive, and take a step back. It's not just the seizing of an oil vessel. There are international sanctions that have been put in place for people who do business with Iran in terms of buying or buying and reselling their oil and their oil products. In fact, this is what's been happening in Venezuela and in other socialist countries, especially in South America. They actually do business with the terrorist regime in Iran, which everybody realizes exports terror and death with terror more than any other country in the world. And here you have Venezuela. They're finding ways to get that Iranian oil, sell some of it to Cuba, use some of it themselves. And so there is an argument that the U.S. has a right, because it's a breaking of the sanctions against a terrorist state, for Venezuela to be doing this. We've seen the U.S. taking other things. They're rattling the saber, so-called. There's even talk maybe is there going to be something that happens on land. Keep something in mind. Take a step back and keep in mind that for decades, for many decades in Venezuela and in many African countries, what happens there where old standing regimes, that in many cases quite rightly get thrown out, who you have taking over are arch socialists. This would be in many cases youngish, charismatic leaders, and they go off to the best schools in terms of socialist, how to have a socialist government, and they'll go to Oxford and Cambridge and come away totally socialized. They come back to their countries, they bring in socialist policies, which are always guaranteed to make a country and a population poorer. And then what do to try and get a little wealth going? They start working locally with the narco networks, with the drug networks, and these regimes, many of them, and Venezuela is a leader now, become viciously opposed to the United States as an entity. The drugs that they do ship in there are deathly and deadly, as we know. In the last year, over 100,000 opioid or fentanyl-related deaths alone in the U.S., and it's all as a result, when you have someone knocking at the door and you go down to see who that is and it's a drug dealer, then you have to beware that those drugs that are coming in to your country are going to destroy your young people and older people also. And so the Trump regime is simply taking a very strong stand against this. At about 4 times the rate, people are dying of drug overdoses in the U.S., about 4 times the rate that young people were dying in the Vietnam War, the soldiers who were getting sent over there. So the United States is doing what other people have thought, but nobody's willing to say. They're just saying no more, we've had it, and we're going to do all we can to smash these. They are quite properly called narco-terrorism regimes. So watch for that to continue to emerge. It's not going away. You're not going to see the Trump regime backing off of this. If anything, it should highlight the fact that many of these countries, Venezuela, before it was totally captured by socialist thought and socialist government and socialist thinking, was actually, you go back in the 50s and 40s and 50s, and 60s, seeing it emerge, it was becoming a very prosperous country, richer, and the poor are getting more established and actually beginning to move up. Now, we can argue, and it's a great debate, on whether some of those regimes were in fact heavy-handed regimes or not. The fact is, these socialist regimes in South America destroy the wealth and prosperity in their countries. They destroy the ability and the hope that poor people can actually get ahead and move ahead. And the United States has had a doctrine for a long time, but they haven't acted on it that much. It's called the Monroe Doctrine, and it's named after one of their former presidents who said, if we're going to be safe and secure on the continent, then we've got to really have some say about what's going on in the entire hemisphere, and that means also in South America. So that's why you're seeing these things emerge. Trump is doing what other presidents have wanted to do but always been afraid to do it. And let's have a good debate on whether we think that's right or not. But mainstream media, again, being culturally Marxist, does not whine, does not raise the issue about socialist regimes, whether it's Lula, it doesn't matter who else it is, in Venezuela, and not Venezuela, but countries like Venezuela and South America. They never sound the alarm. They just let these regimes continue to destroy the hopes of their people. And the U.S. is saying, we've had it, and we're going to take steps to try and eliminate that. So for the first time, what we're seeing here is governments, in Venezuela's case, actually paying a price for allowing and being involved in narco-terrorism, in dealing with also the terrorism that comes out of Iran. You know, if you really want, I've talked about this a couple months ago, if you want to see a great movie that shows the roots of mainstream media, culturally Marxist thinking, there's a movie, it came out a number of years ago, it's called Mr. Jones. If you want to see a good movie, it's historic, it's true, and it shows, and it uses the New York Times and its famous editor way back in the 30s, who was supposed to be reporting on the horrors of communism in the Soviet Union. And of course, he and his other colleagues in the media were totally willingly gave themselves over to not telling the truth about the horrific effects of communism and socialism. But it's a great movie, and some of those very same pressures are alive and well today in terms of mainstream media. Take a look at it. It's called Mr. Jones. Well, going from Mr. Jones to Mr. Jimmy Fallon, he has gone totally ballistic. He didn't like the cover of Time magazine. They came out with their annual, as they do near the end of every year. Time magazine does a cover in which they talk about, it used to be called Man of the Year, then quite appropriately it was changed to Person of the Year. There's been times when it hasn't even been a human being, but this year, last year, for instance, was Donald Trump. This year, what they've done is they've taken that famous picture, goes way back from 1932, about the construction of the skyscrapers in New York City, and you can remember it shows 8 workers sitting way out on a girder high above the city, and they're munching on their lunch. They don't even have safety belts and other things on, and it was an iconic picture. So what Time magazine did this year, they took 8 of the leaders in AI development from around the world and AI-related companies, and they transposed them sitting on that girder. So, you know, it's people like Mark Zuckerberg from Meta, Elon Musk is there, of course, Lisa Su and her famous devices company, Sam Altman at OpenAI. So they're sitting there, and Jimmy Fallon went completely berserk on his show, as he tends to do, and his usual he does a high school level anger and diatribe attack on anything that is sort of entrepreneurial or small business oriented. And he says it's just terrible because AI is going to destroy the world, and here they are promoting these individuals as if they're great people. Well, first of all, Time magazine doesn't take a position politically on who they put there. They just say, for whoever it is, the person of the year or persons of the year, they just say these people are having a huge impact. They don't say whether they like them or not. And of course, Jimmy Fallon is saying this is the end of the world. AI is the end of the world. Listen, there's problems with AI, just like there was problems with the discovery of fire. People were going to get burned, and they still get burned. But we are all glad for the heat and the energy that is generated and warmth that comes from fire. So every new breakthrough has its downside. And Jimmy Fallon, and the ultimate of hypocrisy, as he usually is, and you can remember how, he tries to present himself as a compassionate human being, and the horrific things he said about Charlie Kirk in the right at the time of his killing. Very harsh things, which almost all people, including the network that Fallon works for, said that's going too far, and he had to step down for a while. He had to apologize, etc. Well, he's equally, numb-minded on this issue, because he's saying AI is the end of the world. Listen, there's problems with AI, and there's things that have to be watched. But when you think about it, the original poster of the workers on that girder, they were all using modern equipment of the day. That in fact, they were using mechanized equipment that was putting other people out of work who hadn't moved to mechanized forms of construction. They were putting all kinds of people out of work. And we know that whenever whether it's the Industrial Revolution or the Energy Revolution, the discovery of and the internet and everything that goes with it, there's always movement, there's always relocations of workers. The net effect has been, especially if you look over the last 200 years, overall progress in the human condition, health, science, amazing breakthroughs in almost every way you can look, along with downsides that have to be looked at. But the human spirit is capable of coming up with ongoing ways in which to care for themselves. That's been the trajectory of human history, especially over the last couple hundred years. Jimmy Fallon just denies that. The other thing he denies is that building that was being built at the time, that was the RCA building, which is famous for the whole RCA network, famous then and now for breakthroughs in media, in communications, the radio industry, the television industry, everything that we benefit from those industries. That's the building that was being built, the very building, the very types of breakthroughs that gives Jimmy Fallon the ability for his somewhat slow-witted attempt to actually get huge coverage. And it puts him back then in the definition of what I call champagne socialists. These are people who say it's bad for everybody else to have money, but not for me. So as long as I can keep making big money and the rest of you, you can suffer on your own. So kind of interesting to see some of the hypocrisy ongoing there on his particular show. In looking at that, we kind of look at what's going on in terms of this week, some major, and these are major revelations that have been unrolling over the last couple months, actually last few months, in terms of lack of proper auditing at high levels of government. It's really been brought out strongly in the U.S., where whether you talk about spending at the so-called Doge units of government, or almost every area, lack of proper auditing always results in billions of dollars being stolen or wasted. Doesn't matter, it happens on the left, it happens on the right. If you don't have independent auditors on all government spending, you are going to get widespread theft. And the details of the court case that have come out against the group called Feeding Our Future. This was a group founded by a woman by the name of Amy Block and her other partner in crime there. These are people who've been convicted, so I'm not making this up. Salim Saeed. These folks, millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars siphoned off, all in the name of, and what they were supposed to be doing was taking care of kids who were getting dislocated at the time of COVID and the pandemic, and they were raising up huge works, buildings, and operations to feed kids who were being affected by the COVID pandemic. And now it's turned out these two individuals and 79 others have been charged spending money on beautiful homes for themselves. Mr. Salim Saeed with his Mercedes, and on, just outrageous amounts of money that they were taking from the feeding of kids, which is what they were supposedly supposed to be doing. So I just say this, that and it's also come out, as you know, people might not like the manner and the tone which Donald Trump has been using relative to the Somali community, but the discovery of over $1 billion of aid that should have gone to people truly in need in the U.S., funneled to the Somali community, even overseas, even into acts of terrorism. And we can all get angry at and say this was nasty, the terminology that's being used, but folks, these are hard-earned taxpayer dollars that are being stolen regularly on any organization. I don't care, it doesn't matter what race you are, what religion, what particular conservative, liberal persuasion you have. If you do not audit carefully public money and how it's being spent, it will be stolen, it will be wasted, it will go to people who shouldn't be getting it, and the real people in need will not be getting it. That includes First Nations groups. In Canada, they under former Prime Minister Harper, there were some respectful ways put in place to audit. Many of those First Nations groups are doing a tremendous job with reinvesting in their communities, and there's quite a number where the chiefs and some of their people are stealing the money, buying luxurious homes, going and living overseas. So it's both. It's all there. It's in all communities, and it comes down to, in every jurisdiction, if you don't audit it, it's going to get stolen. So hopefully we can learn a lesson from that. On the culture side, I don't know if you follow Ryan Johnson's Knives Out movie, Whodunit, that really grabbed a lot of attention. He's on his third one now. This one's called Wake Up, Dead Man. And what's been interesting is Mr. Johnson is saying that to try and put a little more human side and spiritual side into his movies. He actually sat down with a group of Catholic priests, talked about the movie he was going to be doing, wanted to get some of their impact and input because there's a Catholic priest who is involved in this. So kind of interesting. Let's take a look at that and see if it makes a difference when you're consulting with your spiritual leaders. And I'll tell you what, as we're in the Advent season, that's a positive thing to be doing. And if you're looking for something to watch, sit around and watch, it might sound a little different at Christmas time, but there's a documentary out called Universe Designed, and it's done by a former atheist who's taken a deep dive into science and cosmology and come up with the fact that actually he does believe there is intelligent design. As a matter of fact, God himself involving himself in the creation of the universe. So at Christmas time and Advent, you might want to be thinking about that. That's the quick wrap, folks, from some of the things that happened last week and what you can be looking forward to happening in the week ahead. Thanks for tuning in. See you Monday.